Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Education Policy Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, May 15th, and the time is now 5:01 p.m. With me this evening, I have board member Mary Ellen Flaherty Ludwig, Ralph Felonzizi, Robert Pennington, and today we will be going over the policy for trips. We have it's number 5008R, field trip regulation and processes. And with that, Mary Ellen, were you able to take a look at the minutes?
I was. There were a couple little problems. One was in how Ralph gets identified. He's an IT director, not an ITS director. So it was kind of cute. And then for Rob, it hyphenated the word superintendent. It should be just one word. But everything else looked pretty good to me.
Okay, so then motion to approve with those two corrections. This is just us.
Yes.
Thank you. And I will transfer the meeting over to Mr. Valenzizi.
Great. Thanks, Chairman Carpio, and thanks, Mary Ellen, too, for being here as well. We're tonight, what we want to do for you is to just take a couple of minutes to do our first read of a policy. And this is actually a special meeting in comparison to our regular meeting, which is going to happen next week. But we do know that we've got a number of policies over the last few months that have come up. And in order to kind of get through the agendas and really work through and have conversations on where we're at with these, we may need to actually have a couple meetings also over the summer to be able to just kind of get things through those final approvals. But tonight, it's really focused very briefly on one policy, which I know the board has been thinking through, which is our field trip policy. So we've actually had a field trip policy in place. Just to kind of, as a quick overview, as we've been going through the last few months, we realized that there's actually some systems that we want to make sure that are a little bit cleaner and more transparent in the way that they work. So what we want to do is take that policy and rewrite the regulation that goes along with that policy. So the actual overarching components of the policy are not changing, but they'll be reflected within the regulation. So tonight, really what I wanted to do is break this into 4 parts. And it's really through a presentation. Instead of reading through the policy, I've taken all the components of the policy and actually put them in there. So it's referenced, it's on the agenda. People can refer to the policy. I can pull it up if you like. But I think the PowerPoint actually defines it a little bit better because it goes right through all the sections. But part one defines the regulation of what it is. Part 2 of what we're going to do is review the actual form, what's actually included. Part 3 is just talk about the workflow. How do we process it to make sure the checks and balances are all there? And then part 4 is just a timeline for the implementation, including the fact that we have 6 trips that have been identified that have started the process, but we want to make sure it's cleaned up. So we'll talk about how that's all going to look, and then get feedback from the board as long as we know this is the way we want to proceed. So with that.
Not to interrupt you, for the record, Janine Randolph has joined the meeting.
Are you guys seeing my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so tonight, really, let's start with our first part that I just mentioned that we're going to discuss. I'm just trying to straighten my screen out a little bit here. Is a regulation overview. So why do we go through this whole process of updating our field trips? We want to make sure, as we heard from the board, that we want to implement the policy effectively. We wanted to provide clear, updated procedures for planning, approval, and making sure that we execute this correctly so that things are in place. We wanted to also make sure we heard that we want this in alignment with instructional goals, which is why Mr. Pennington and Mr. Asmani helped out a lot in this whole process, as well as Allison and Marianne, to make sure that the workflow was working. We heard also that we wanted to prioritize student safety and well-being, so we've included that in the workflow process to make sure that that's being addressed. We wanted to streamline the workflow to make sure that it's done in a way that's effective and that we can track a little bit better, which is going to be an online system using what we talked about as one of our goals, Google, moving this forward. And we want to make sure that it applies to all school-sponsored trips that are off school grounds. So that includes single-day as well as multi-day trips. So some of the terms that we wanted to better define in this, because I think there was maybe some question around it, but we've taken the time to make sure that these are all specifically defined within the regulation. What a field trip is. A field trip is a school-sponsored supervised journey linked to an educational program. The trip types that we can have are basically four. You can have a single day or a multi-day, and multi-day would usually be an overnight trip. An in-state or an out-of-state trip. And out-of-state would also include international trips. There will always be a trip advisor identified, and that is the certified staff member that we have that's going to be leading the trip. Our chaperones, there were some questions around this. So for our chaperones, the way chaperones will be identified is current MPS employees approved by the principal. And we will have a 1-to-10 ratio of chaperones for any trip. Volunteers and parents may assist on single-day trips with the principal approval. They don't replace a chaperone, but parents and volunteers, we know that the feedback that we've gotten was, especially with elementary schools, we have a lot of parents that come and help out with these single-day trips and stuff at different times, or for like if they're going to to the Maritime Aquarium or those types of trips. So we want to make sure that we have parents involved. So volunteers and parents are able to join the trips, but we do have to have identified chaperones to meet our criteria. And there's also the terms that you'll see throughout the policy itself of a principal, which it's pretty self-explanatory. EDLD is the Executive Director of Leadership Development. That is Marianne and Allison. Okay, so they're the ones that actually are part of the process. Obviously, the superintendent, the Board of Ed, and the finance department, which is led by Linda. And please stop me if you have any questions on any of this stuff.
Okay, Ralph?
Yes.
Just one question on that. It looked like the parent or volunteer to help out were only for single day and not for overnight. Did I hear that correctly? Is that what you intend?
Yes. Yes. And like I said, this is where, once again, bringing it to the board, this is the way that we adhere to that for those purposes. The chaperones are the 1-to-10 ratio certified staff. But for single day trips that are going to the, just going local trips and so forth, we want to be able to let parents be involved, especially at the elementary school level.
And so it seems to me that some of the trips we approved had some parents or volunteers that were part of that, and they will be grandfathered in. Is that?
So that's in part 4. We'll talk,
right.
Yes, but hold on to that thought, because that's exactly it. There's going to be some stuff that we're going to have to set a timeline of, like, when this gets implemented in this format, and then what do we do to clean up the 6 trips that have already started the process.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Keep going.
Mm-hmm. So really, the principles behind doing all this is we heard that we want to make sure that there's a clear educational value. So that's going to be demonstrated, and it's going to be connected to curriculum. There is a section for them to be able to fill that out. We want to make sure that things are planned out correctly, and that no fundraising or commitments are done before things are approved. So that's very, very clear in the process of what we've done. We've also heard, and we know that we want to make sure that it's identified clearly that there's a comprehensive safety plan required for all trips. One thing we added in there that we didn't even think that we needed before was, if it's, and many times, especially being on the coast, if there's anything around water, making sure that if kids are going to be swimming, that there's a lifeguard included in that process so that there's a lifeguard on duty. Student conduct, we want to make sure that also that people understand that your code of conduct actually applies on a trip as well as in the school. And we also want to make sure that the supervision, getting back to your point, Mary Ellen, is a certified employee as a chaperone. So defined as a chaperone is a certified employee, and we need to have a minimum of 1 to 10 for any trips. So we also went through how we get a trip approved. So it starts off by the trip advisor submitting an online request form. The first step is a principal will be reviewing that, and we'll go through the little nitty-gritty piece of this in a minute, review it, and then send it off for approval. So they'll look at it, they'll be able to approve the online form. From there, all trips go to Marianne and Allison for review and approval. If there is a cost, or if it is over, if there's over $20,000, so if there's a large cost to any trip, and many of our trips do have that, even one-day trips potentially could, and that's the overarching cost, like the full cost of transportation, the registrations, anything else. It will need to be able to go through finance first, and we'll talk about why and how we're going to be able to manage that. What Linda's referred to as an RFP process. And then from there, it needs to go to superintendent, and then finally the board approval for any multi-day trips. And then it gets finalized from there. So that's basically the last step there, is making sure that everybody in the process, including, let's say it was Joanna managing transportation because she's part of the process in some cases, in some of the workflow. Once a trip gets approved, everybody gets notified so that we can then initiate it and execute it correctly. So for single day trips, the workflow works is that you'll have a trip advisor that creates a trip. It goes to the principal. It goes to to Marianne and Allison. If it's over 20K, it needs to go to finance. And then it goes through that final preparation pieces and to go to superintendent and then go to the board. So that it just goes through it just gets approved at that point. Single day trips don't get approved by the board. The submission deadline for these is we're recommending at this point, this is what we've been following, 15 school days prior to a trip. And if there's a caveat to that. If there's a need to gather fundraising or funding for it, and they can't do it within 15 days, the trip would need to be approved prior to that, because you can't start fundraising until that happens. Is that pretty clear? I mean, I think it'll be clearer when we actually walk through the workflow. Multi-day trips start off once again with the trip advisor, goes to the principal, goes to Marianne and Allison, goes to Linda, goes to the superintendent, and then finally to the board. There are going to be deadlines for the submissions. For a domestic multi-day trip, at least 60 days prior. International trips, at least 120 days prior. Now, that being said, there's a caveat to that. If there's a cost and fundraising has to happen before you start that process. So if you know it's going to take you a year to be able to collect the funds, you need to start this process before that to be able to get it approved so that you can start collecting funds. And that'll be built into the workflow of the actual online document. There were questions, and we wanted to be clear about the equity and dealing with large expenditures, especially over 20,000, because we do have an RFP process. So funding sources are usually students and families, right? We wanted to make sure there's equity in what we do. So no student will be denied participation due to the inability to pay. So I mean, one way or another, we do this now where if there's a need, there's a need for support for some of our students that should be on these trips, then we find ways to be able to kind of help support that. And I know Sandra had explained that quickly at one of our board meetings. That will continue. Fundraising does require a separate approval if they're not to collect funds, but to fundraise. So once again, we talk about our fundraising policy. If there's something that's being done that they're using for fundraising, that should still go through its own approval process for fundraising. And the trigger for finance is anything that's over 20,000. It will require a review, vendor guidance, and potentially an RFP. I believe we'll address this in a few minutes, but one of the things we are looking to do is to have an approved list of vendors that go through the RFP process. So they follow all the criteria and then they get approved. So you know you can work with those vendors, because having schools having to do an RFP process would be cumbersome for them. But we still want to make sure all the criteria is in place and that we've actually made sure all the checks and balances there. So we would do that ahead of time, making them an approved vendor. We do this a lot on the city side. I do it a lot with we have ways of purchasing computers that they become on what's called a state contracted list, so that then the state goes through that same type of a process and approves us to work with CDW to buy certain things. We would be doing the same thing locally, so that then we know that these companies are vetted. They've actually know what needs to happen, what the criteria is that we need, so that all of those pieces are in place. Any questions on that?
No, seems good and detailed. That's good.
And we also want to make sure that we ensure student well-being. That's one thing that came out. So there will always be a safety plan that's put into place. Permission slips need to be required by every guardian. Transportation, we want to make sure that there is no self-transportation for students or for parents. At one point in a forum, I think there was, it had mentioned something about the fact that, in the past, and this is really going back quite a while, we used to have parents that used to be able to drive, to field trips and stuff, and that is not allowed anymore. They have to be approved vendors, and buses that students travel on. And we also want to make sure the caveats there that the district, and this there'll be insurance and ways of district canceling due to safety concerns for students. So that will always be built in, and those approved vendors will understand that as we kind of go through that process. So really, the key features, just to kind of like summarize that, we wanted to make sure it was in alignment with the policy. We wanted to make sure that we emphasized that there's an educational value to the trip and also student safety. Those are two things that kind of stuck out from the conversations that we've had. We wanted to make sure that we redefined the roles very clearly for everybody. We wanted to make sure there was a structured approval workflow with clear steps. We wanted to make sure there's a procurement process for things of over $20,000. We wanted to make sure that we had equity built into this, so that all students have access to these trips. And then finally, we wanted to also make sure that it was a little bit more efficient in the way that we process this, so that there's never a question of the workflow. So that's actually the whole regulation. And then we're looking to now work towards the implementation of this as well, which we'll cover in just a second. We're looking for board feedback to make sure that we're on point with this first read and that we're doing this correctly. We are looking to develop and launch the online field trip form and workflow this summer. We're going to be providing training for principals, trip advisors, and any staff that are involved. So really the main training though for this is principals and trip advisors. Staff really just need to understand the process because they're really not filling out the form. And then we want to make sure that this is communicated to everybody as we implement this. So then the online, before I go on to part two, which is the actual online form components, any questions at all?
I have lots, but if you want to continue, I'm just writing it down and then
Oh, okay.
because
Okay.
you may answer them as you go along.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, so I'll do that then. So
Yeah, I
so
feel the same way. I have a few, but it seems like it's coming together. So carry
okay.
on.
All right. So then what I felt like was important to be able to help offer clarification for this is kind of get an idea of what this online form is going to look like. So the first section of the online form will actually have the requester name that's going to be filled in. And you can see that these are my little, some of the parentheses are things that I use to be able to kind of identify how that form is going to be built and what those fields will look like. So the data submission will be auto timestamped. School name will be there, so there's no, it's an easy way to filter. TripAdvisor name, student group, estimated number of students will all be fields that are there. Trip destination, dates, departure, and return times need to be added there. And then single day, multi-day, domestic, international, all have to be included. And they'll be you'll be able to choose between those different items on the actual form. There will be a section for educational purpose that the TripAdvisor will need to fill in the instructional objectives, how it connects to curriculum. They're going to need to attach an itinerary to the actual form, and once it's completed, a detailed itinerary file upload, so that then it's available for people to see as they're going through the process, and we'll have that on record. Chaperones. All chaperones need to be listed. The total number of chaperones needs to be there. The form will actually auto-calculate this too as well. So it'll kind of kick back. If you're saying that there's 20 kids going and you have one chaperone, the form will not let you complete it. It's a 1-to-10 ratio. If we don't meet those ratios, that you won't be able to even get it to the next step, which is getting it to the principal for their approval. And then there'll be actually confirmation check boxes within there that they're stating that yes, these are MPS employees. And obviously we go back and forth and check that, but it's something that will be actually in the process, that there's a statement that we know that chaperones are MPS employees. With safety and logistics, some other components of the form will be how are they traveling? And they'll have choices, is it by bus, is it by plane, so forth, so that we have those actually aligned for them. There'll be a section for transportation arrangements and the expectations for behavior. Provisions for students with disabilities. So if there's, what's needed and what plans are in place for any students that actually may need additional support. The safety plan needs to be attached to this. So they will have some, whatever the safety plan is. If there's, I had mentioned before, swimming involved, that there needs to be a lifeguard. There has to be a yes, that there's obviously a lifeguard on duty when they're there. And there's a confirmation checkbox that all of these safety protocols have been reviewed and included. For funding, you need to add in the estimated student total cost. Trips over 20,000 require the finance department involvement and potential RFP. So this is once again that idea of like if they're on the approved vendor list, we'll have a section there that allows you to choose that that's the vendor that you're choosing that's already been on the approved that's already been vetted as an approved vendor. Funding sources, you need to say where the money's coming from. So, and it's not specific, but is it coming directly from the student? Is it, are there PTO funds being used for it? Is it a grant and so forth? Are there, what are the financial aid provisions that are in place? So for curriculum, for trips that are being made, so that we know that we do have equity and students actually have the ability to go. And if there's fundraising required, they need to make sure that this is actually there's no fundraising that can begin prior to BOE approval for the trip. There's going to be a section on the cancellation policy. We want to make sure that all the vendor policies have been reviewed, even if they are an approved vendor, just making sure that everything's been reviewed. There's an understanding of like non-refundable dates or penalties so that we actually can identify that. And there's got to be insurance confirmation for multi-day trips, which means that needs to be uploaded, that there's the ability in case of a safety or a cancellation that we have the ability to do that. So that's a safeguard for our students and our parents. Right place. And then the final confirmation. So then the submitter will acknowledge this with a checkbox compliance, and they will hit submit. Okay, that talks about the form itself. So those are all the components that will go into the form. Now there's a workflow of how it actually works. So it's online, and it'll be, that's, I guess, my shameless plug around my other goal. It's like it'll be built in Google Forms with automation tools. So the first step is a TripAdvisor submits the form online. The system checks for the required fields, calculates ratios, as I mentioned before, identifies a trip type, and evaluates the cost. Then the TripAdvisor receives a confirmation email that it's been submitted, okay, and that it actually was approved. Well, not approved. It was accepted as a submittal. From there, it goes to the principal. The principal then reviews the educational value, the safety, cost, and policy alignment. The principal then needs to approve or reject with comments. If the principal rejects it, workflow ends, it goes back, has to start again. If it's approved, it goes to Marianne and Allison, and the TripAdvisor then is notified, so that then they know, yes, it's gone through your principal, except your principal has approved this. It's now going to the next step in the workflow. Marianne and Allison then review and go through the same thing, either approve or reject with comments. If they reject it, it goes back and it has to start again. If it's approved, it goes on once again to the next step. And what everybody in the process, the principal, I should have actually put that down in this, but the principal and the TripAdvisor would be notified. Yes, it's gone through the EDLD process now. Now it's moving on to the next. If it's over 20,000, then it gets routed to the finance department, and the finance checks over the vendors, ensures compliance, makes sure that if there's a new vendor that's in place, that we actually go through the process to be able to, whether it's an RFP or whatever needs to happen, so that that's in place. And once that's done, then it gets recommended to be moved on to the next step. And for multi-day trips, goes to the superintendent. Superintendent reviews, either accepts or rejects it. If it's rejected, notification goes out to everybody that the workflow ends, so that they're aware of it and something needs to happen to be able to be corrected. If it gets approved, then it moves on to the board agenda. And then it'll be actually placed then onto the board, on the board agenda for approval. And that last step there is the Board of Ed will review the process at a scheduled meeting. You'll either approve it or reject it. If it's rejected, we will let all the parties know. And if it's approved, it goes into action. So it's a pretty straightforward workflow, but we feel like, at least this way it'll be time date stamped the whole way. We'll make sure that we can actually follow the process very, very clearly. And then once it's approved, just like I said, if there's other people that need to be involved, like transportation, the TripAdvisor can start planning, doing what they need to do. Everybody else will be notified to get started, so they can start executing the plans for the for whatever it is, whether it's fundraising or getting buses scheduled and everything else. And the last piece to this is that last question about how do we actually put this into place? So we've been taking time right now to just do a data cleanup and looking at the current trips. So I know that I believe the board is they've been notified that we have I believe 6 international trips that are in some way, shape, or form started the process. So and as we're starting to clean up that right now, we want to make sure that right now we ensure that there's complete documentation and we collect any missing data. We would like to be able to present these to the board. I believe it was the May 20th date. I just have to double and triple check that date. But after the next approval that we come up to with whatever group of trips these are, then everybody from there on in, especially for multi-day trips, are going to follow the process moving forward. So we believe we've captured everything that's happened. People are aware of it, and now we'll actually be starting to implement. The new part of the implementation in July, we'll be training principals in this, and then trip advisors in August and September. So that will be something that the principals will need to, it'll be kind of like a turnkey type of training that they'll be given. We'll create a small little video tutorial so that they can actually explain to, this is how you go through this process. Very similar to what we're doing right now, but actually just walking through the workflow of the document. The staff will, at the beginning of the year, be distributed the regulation and understand where to get to the form for any of these trips. We will also make sure that we submit and, through Parent Square, inform parents and guardians of the new process. And we want to make sure that this Kaizen goes into place with the new fiscal year. So the idea is that the board will now have one last, we'll be bringing up to you one last group of trips that we've identified that have kind of been in the process so that you're aware of them. And if there's fundraising that started or anything else, that we kind of put that into place, knowing with the caveat that the same with these last 2 trips, that anything that has to be done that you see in that are compliance issues, safety issues, are all taken care of moving forward. There will be no other trips. So after that will be coming to you that has not been truly vetted through this whole process from beginning to end. And then we'd like to be able to, I'm aiming for August 1st to be able to have the form ready to be able to be used. We talked about doing this at the principals retreat. We may actually do it at a separate time just because of the timing and the amount of stuff that we have to cover in the principals retreat as well, but it'll be sometime in July. So all the new trips from there on in, we'll always use the updated form and workflow. And we'll make sure that everything's been reviewed and completed, documentation for pre-July 1 trips, which are the ones that we just mentioned. And then we want to make sure that we also provide ongoing support for this transition. So making sure that people understand that this is the process. If there's any questions, either myself or somebody will be happy to kind of get out to a building and talk them through whatever questions they have. And then we also want to make sure that we're, like anything else, just monitoring this and supporting them. So as we go through the year, we'll be talking to trip advisors. Does this make it easier for you? Are there things that we need to include? Very similar to what we're doing with the PTA with the fundraising form. Constantly going back to be able to say, are there things that we can tweak to be able to make this better? And just make sure that we're just continually improving in our processes. So really, in summary, we wanted to take this in 4 phases. We wanted to clean up, we wanted to make sure we train people, we want to make sure we launch, and we also want to make sure that we're monitoring the process throughout the year. We hope that this shows that we're trying to support compliance, clarity, and consistency with our policies and our processes with our students and families. We want to focus on student safety and instructional alignment. We've made sure that we've actually highlighted that. And we also want to make sure everybody's in the loop and they understand the process. So I think that's been our learnings from what we've just experienced and stuff. So with that, I'll leave it with questions and let me pull this down. And I can put up the policy too if you'd like to see it. So,
Yeah.
Or actually the regulation, I should say. But with that, any questions?
There's
Diana?
a lot going through my head.
Okay.
So I
Uh,
have some. Do you want to go first, Diana?
we can go back and forth and
Okay.
the section where it says MPS staff, I would like that to say current MPS staff.
Okay. So MPS staff.
Okay. Back and forth on that. I'm assuming that means counselors, paras. It doesn't have to be a teacher.
No, yes, it's just certified. Yes, it's certified staff. And Allison, thanks for joining too. So Allison and Rob, please feel free to just chime in.
So am I correct on that? Could it be custodial staff? Could it be just an employee, or does it have to be someone certified in an educational manner?
I think it's a staff member because I know that when I was a principal, we had paraeducators that would help chaperone a field trip,
Mm-hmm.
and they are MPS employees.
Right.
Right, and the one running the program would be a teacher. So that's, that takes out that. So,
And I will, I mean,
Sometimes it could be a counselor though, depending on the type of trip it is.
Mm-hmm.
right, because if it's a college tour.
Mhm.
yeah. So maybe though, TripAdvisor maybe needs a little bit more of a clarification. A TripAdvisor would always be certified because would we ever have we would probably not have anybody else besides a certified staff being the lead.
Correct.
Correct.
That sounds reasonable.
Perfect. Okay. I can add that in.
On the emergency list, if we can have them put down who would be the person responsible to stay behind. Because, with the climate now, what if a child can't get back? Who's the one that's going to stay behind with that child?
This is an international trip.
Because that would be on a trip by trip, because it may not be the person that put the trip together, but it could be someone that has more flexibility in that group or something, as long as we have someone listed, because we don't want them to get to the airport and then everybody's scrambling and not knowing what they're doing. Janine?
No, I'm good. I'm enjoying the ping ponging.
Right. And I would assume though that actually would be in the safety. We would have to identify that within the safety plan.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Okay.
Mary Ellen?
No, I was just thinking, I've been on so many field trips, and I don't know if it has to be designated, but someone always gets sick. When you put together a safety plan, you usually have, whether formal or informal, that if somebody gets sick, then one person will be a rover and pick up those things. So I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but just that
a caregiver, CPR certified person.
Somebody, well, I don't want to.
In case they have to take them to the hospital or if they have to stay behind in the hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
Because that changes the ratio right there. Because if you have 20 kids and you only have 2 chaperones, that means one chaperone is out traveling with the 20 kids while one is taking care. I mean, I think that would be fine depending on the school age, but I can see where that would, fit in there too.
Okay.
But I mean, we want we're requiring a minimum of 1 to 10. So I mean, they could always have a few more than that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that's how it works. Somebody always has to be able to take care if somebody gets injured or hurt, or and you're not being the docent to walk around a museum or whatever. But I don't know if I want to put that directly, demand that it's there.
Yeah, I think the idea of actually there may be a way to word it so the same way that Diana was asking about someone staying behind, one way or another in the safety plan, how that's there for someone to be able to kind of who's going to be the person that's going to be able to care for a student, whether they're sick
Yes,
or
that is
whether
related.
there's another issue. So
There are issues that would require an adult to stay with one person.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, there's that.
Okay.
Keep going.
I'm just writing all over the place. On the single day and the international days, on the single day, I think we need to extend it to a month. 15 days is too short if they're doing fundraisers. For example, like for Nature's Classroom, when Ethan was fundraising for that, that took at least 3 to 4 weeks where they were fundraising, selling candy and things like that.
That's more than one day.
Yeah.
It's not a single day. That's a multiple day.
But even so though, so Diana, the way that I tried to word this is if there's any fundraising before the fundraising starts, it has to you have to actually get it approved.
As approved.
So if they know it's going to take 30 days to raise the funds, even though it's a 15-day criteria, once they can't start, they have to start at 30 days earlier because that's the minimum requirement is 15 days. If there's fundraising that can't be done within 15 days, they have
Yeah,
to.
but they can't do it without us approving. Is this 15 days for it to come on our to us to approve? Because that takes away.
No,
No.
no. A one-day trip doesn't come to the board for approval. And the thing to just remember.
Yes, we don't do one day.
A one-day trip could be to, Holiday Hill or Club
College.
Day.
Mhm.
Beach and
Most don't even come to me.
Yeah.
If they're in state, the principal, and they're not an overnight trip, the principal approves those trips.
Okay, so then the multiple days.
Right.
Still, don't you think we need more time for that? For fundraising? Because if we're telling them they can't start fundraising without us, we need to give them enough time to fundraise.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, I think I put that down as a minimum requirement, meaning it may take 2 years. So, but they can't even start as they're going through the process of the application, if they don't think that they can do it within, this is part of the training. If they can't do it within that 120 days, they know that they have to start a year and a half early. So the 120 days is literally just a minimum requirement.
So minimum requirement, but we need to at least make the language strong enough so that they know they cannot start raising funds, because like the international trips, they start a year in advance.
Yeah.
So they cannot collect any money until we sign off on it.
That's right. Definitely. And it'll kick back too. I mean, the part of the form is like once they start saying that there's funds that are attached to it, it actually has to go to financiers. There's other safeguards I think we put in place in the workflow that stop it from actually getting to that point where they can even start any of that process.
And on the form, does it say anything about cash?
Oh no.
The last trip that they were collecting $100 per child, we should have at least a spreadsheet on how they used it once they come back. Because if you're tipping, you really don't have receipts, right? But at least if they told us we tipped this or we tipped that and blah, 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 when they return, so there's a record of it financially for an audit. Because right now they're collecting $100 a child and we don't know what they're using it for. They can't prove it.
Is there some kind of way that they have to keep cash if they're collecting cash at school?
Yeah, I'll have to. There is actually, and I think that actually falls into place with I can get clarification from that from Linda.
Okay.
But I'll get more clarification around cash, how it's kept.
And the deposit, I think it's a daily, can't keep it.
Yeah, and then also reporting out.
Yep.
And I think that there's one other clarification too that I need to make as well, and that's with the in-state single day trips. Those are actually not approved by the EDLD. It's like, so if you're going to the Maritime Center, that's not approved by Allison and Mary. But that will actually, but anything that is out of state, I believe it works.
Mhm.
So if they go to New York to a Broadway play or something like that, that comes through Mary Ann and I.
Back to if they go to the Maritime Center, who pays for the buses? Do they have to pay for their field trip buses?
I think it depends all on the trip. So at times I would say yes, we have to pay for buses for our students to be able to travel. If there's sometimes if there's a way to be able to minimize that cost and stuff, we do. But yes, we do have to cover those costs. So those are things that, once again, it's a finance piece. If there's money that has to be notated where that's coming from, and if it's over a certain threshold and stuff, there's actually an RFP process that we have to go through as well.
So, I mean, just pressing that question, this is just straight knowledge that I don't have, is since we are in such collaboration with the Maritime Center, the aquarium, do we as a system pay for each time we have our kids go over there? Or do the schools have to come up with money to pay for the transportation?
Yeah, Robin, I think there are times when we actually have grants, we have other things that, programs where we've been awarded things through the Maritime Center for students to attend on the Maritime's dime in comparison to any funds that we would be putting out. And that could also include transportation, food, and all those other things. It's a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so it's not
It's
overall
answer. I want to say it is usually at the school level. It is not something that like we connect with from central office, because there are different field trips. If it is something where we had authors come to City Hall and then we brought students, then we planned it and we figured out the busing and all of that piece. But if the school is taking a field trip, even if the Maritime Aquarium or somewhere else, there is usually a cost to it, and it's handled at the school level.
Okay, I see. Oh, Diane,
Yeah.
you have some more, or
I do.
keep going?
I'd like wording on the policy somewhere or in the regulation that the superintendent has all access to any information from the school and from the travel agency, because I didn't like the fact that the travel agency were trying to shut her down, as she called, questioning them, because she is the final person responsible for these trips. For them to tell her that she wasn't allowed to ask questions, that's another concern.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely word that in.
So I see Mary Ellen stand up, so I'll go with the next one. Also, this will probably be a question for Kimberly Legal. Do we need to think about putting in some type of wording about the liability between the differences between chaperones and volunteers on trips? Because if we're saying that chaperones are the ones that are responsible, 10 to 1 ratio, and volunteers are there to help, do we need to put, I don't know, little typing or something in there stating the difference or the responsibilities for liability purposes?
You can. I think you can.
I just think it would cover us in case something does happen under the watch of a volunteer.
So if we take a look, this is the definitions that we put in right now. So a chaperone's a current Norwalk Public School employee.
Yeah.
Designated and approved by the principal to supervise students during a field trip. Chaperones act under the direction of the field trip advisor or faculty leader, whoever that is. Volunteers who are not current employees may assist limited roles with principal approval and can accompany students on single-day trips, but are not considered official chaperones for the ratio or for primary supervision responsibilities. So we can become more clear than that, I believe. Or Diana, does that kind of cover what you're thinking, or you're?
It sort of does, but if Kimberly says it looks good, fine, we can leave it as is. I just want to make sure that, like I said, if something were to happen, just trying to keep the district safe. But if she feels that's good enough, I don't know.
Can I review further and get
Yes,
back to you?
absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Janine, still nothing?
No, it's so much, but
I
I
know.
think it was there's a lot in it. There's a lot in it. I think that we're on the right track for sure. Your guys' questions are very enlightening. Sorry, but I think that if we add some of these things and get some clarification from Kimberly, we should be good.
And I do think that, what's going to happen is this is why we put in there that it's going to be an ongoing process. We like from the feedback that we've gotten so far, we've actually tried to be really comprehensive in the way that we look at this and systemic. There probably are going to be little tweaks that are going to go along, but hopefully you guys can see that it's probably in a more of a shape that you guys will actually that clarification will be there on all those different areas that will be very transparent, and the approval process actually works. But we may need to make some tweaks as we kind of go through this a little bit over the next year. The nice thing about it being part of the regulation is it allows us to be able to make those
Right.
corrections pretty quickly if we need to.
Yeah. Diana, do you have any more? Or
I do, but go ahead, you're next.
well, the first thing I want to say, this is a lot of work on your part, Ralph, on every aspect of this, a lot of work. But the value of field trips is just so high and so deep. It can literally be life-changing for a kid. And I'm not only talking about traveling around the world, but even one-day field trips can lighten up a career, can lighten up just really present children with opportunities that cannot occur inside the classroom. So I think every minute we spend on this is a worthwhile minute. I have questions about when we are concerned with equity, that all children can go on field trips. How does that work out? Is that the reason there's fundraising so that every child can go? Or do some students pay for part of it and then there are little grants for some kids that are needier? How does that work?
Yes, I was going to add to that too. Is there like an application process if a student needs financial aid, or how does that work?
I think schools do different things and sort of have their own process for that. That's not something that I have previously have been involved with. But I know, for example, at CGS, their SGC is also involved in supporting with some of that fundraising for some of the international trips.
In some of my experience, like we've done, the PTA has raised some money as well for students to go on trips, depending on what it is. And, I've never known exactly because it can't be publicized on who it's going to and how they decide that. So I don't know that end of it. But, I know that they have a list of students and, and people come forth if they want to go on the trip and can't afford it as well.
So in essence, we're true to every child who wants to go on the trip can go.
That is, I mean, I can just tell you from a teacher who planned a trip, that was something that we were always very cognizant of. And yes, there was fundraising. We did things like a car wash,
Mhm.
and different events to help raise money that could go towards all students who wanted to go on the field trip. As a former principal, we had PTA that could help in another school that I worked in. We had some Title I funds that we were able to use in different components at different points to really support. So there are many different measures that schools will use. I don't want to put it into one bucket,
Okay, okay.
but
But
people
some,
do get really creative in supporting all students.
So what we could do is actually at that section where we talk about equity, we can actually just add a small text box to be able to say part of the form is for students that may be in financial need and stuff. What are you planning to do? Like so this way there's actually a plan there's a plan that they're documenting. Some may, like you said, go to their SGC, some may do this, but whatever it may be, at least there's notation that there's a plan in place for those students. We can add that to the form so that they actually just narrate out what it is.
Okay.
and
Ralph,
so
that's
just,
always been on the form.
Yeah.
That's been a segment on the form
Oh,
previous.
yeah.
Yes.
okay, good. And so then what I'm hearing is that the run-of-the-mill kid will pay something for a field trip, but not as much because of the fundraising. And a few kids may not have to pay anything. So is that fair to say that when you do go on a field trip, some of the parents are paying some of it? Okay. Okay. That was my main question, equity. Oh, and I'd like to loop back to the concern that Alex was unable to talk to the travel agents because they said she was not on their rules is they can't really discuss details if the person calling is not on the contract.
So part
And
of
so
that,
a suggestion I would make is that every time there's a contract that Alex's name is on every contract in addition to the other people.
yeah, and I think that's also part of the RFP process, meaning that the RFP process, when we go through to get approved vendors, part of the questions is that you understand that if the superintendent wants information for this, you're expected to provide it, period. If not, they're not part of an approved vendor process.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that's helpful. Has that been there before?
What we've never actually done, the approved vendor part of this is new.
Yes.
All right.
Because
All right. So the
I
travel agents haven't had that because I can, I've done field trips before and definitely from their side, they're not supposed to talk to somebody who's not part of the contract.
Yeah, but
Right.
if they go
but
through
it's
the
a
application,
superintendent.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's her
But-
district.
It doesn't make
I
total
thought that was ridiculous that they didn't speak to her. And the RFP is new too, because I asked Alex, because we were talking about how expensive some of these trips are coming through, that we should actually ask vendors for all of them to bid on the trip. We shouldn't be stuck with the same one. And I shouldn't say stuck. Yes, we've had good relationships with them, but I guess Norwalk High's used the same one for quite some time. But even if they're good and we've used them for quite some time, we should really have RFPs and talk up with other vendors just to see what's out there. We may end up with the same company, but we may not.
Yeah, and I think that part of that pre-approved list, you go through that process to be able to kind of remind them on an annual basis, how we're supposed to act. And part of it is in that application to be part of that approved vendor list is that you're expected to be able to do these different things. You're expected to, if there's a question on pricing, if there's, we want to make sure that all these different pieces that we're expecting from safety, from insurance is all included in that process. So once again, I think that's, Linda's the one that will help to manage those pieces to make sure that we get that pre-approved vendor list in place.
Nice.
And like I said, the state does that for us. like even. So we do have we have state approved vendors that we can go to, so that then if I'm going to Capital and I need to buy certain computers, and instead of going through the whole RFP process, if they're on that state approved list, they've already been vetted.
Mhm.
We know that we're getting the best price. We're actually getting, insurance and liability coverage for those machines. It's the same thing. We're just doing that locally.
Mhm.
But I will make sure that there's criteria in there that explains that, yeah, obviously the superintendent has the ability to be able to have access to anything that she needs to, or he.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I would like to comment that the scope that, from beginning to the final execution of it, you've really done a good job of
Capturing everything. Yes.
capturing all these parts. I mean, there are a lot of parts, and it doesn't hurt that you have a really lovely blue background with white letters that made it easy to look at. So
Yes.
I appreciate those presentation skills, because it was enjoyable to look at the
Yeah,
work.
no, well, it's all Allison, Mary Ann, Rob, and Linda really
Okay.
Put all the process.
But there, some ways are nicer than others, and this was a nice way.
All right. Any other questions?
I just want to say thank you for capturing all that.
Great.
Just like Mary Ellen was saying, it's we put a lot out there, I think, as far as the policy when we were discussing it at the board meeting. So, I really appreciate you getting all of that and putting this effort in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's clear. It's clear that you
If
did.
they were listening, they all had their laptops out. They were all
But it's good for this is really good for students. I mean, it's just a great thing that we continue to do this, because it causes a lot of headaches in the little TripAdvisor. That person has a lot on his or her shoulders, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And if everything's clear, nobody can get mad at each other. We're just like, okay, we're here to make a wonderful experience for kids, and then to be safe. And that's it. It's not bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. It's for actually securing the best experience for the kid.
Absolutely.
Right. So then I guess our next steps, and this really isn't for approval, it's the feedback piece. We'll start making those edits, but I do know that we've got a date now to be able to get those 6 trips to you, so that we can, because those are the ones I don't want to use the word grandfather, but those are the ones that we actually are going to clean up, because the process has already, some of the pieces of the process may have already started.
Mhm.
We can keep them whole moving forward, but they'll be in compliance with this as we move forward. But anything new from there beyond those 6 trips, for the multi-day pieces and international, we'll actually go through this process.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Allison, that was a very nice letter you sent to us, and it seems wise that you held back a little bit, and then, as Ralph, you're explaining, that we're going to piecemeal it through, strong on the safety aspect, but on the fundraising and all that will be a little more okay, we're all getting used to this bit now.
Thank you, everyone. I know it's been a long day. This was a very, very deep conversation meeting, which was amazing. And yeah, so thank you. Have a good evening. I'll see Mary Ellen and Janine in a bit. So
2 more minutes.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Don't forget first book on Saturday.
First book. Woo.
I'll be there.
I'll be there. Good night.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Thanks,
Good
everybody.
night.
Bye.